what we want to do is we want to set up a nice surface for us to work on. Because the first thing we're going to be talking about in drafting is line quality and what softer, thinner, lighter lines mean versus heavier, thicker, darker lines mean in a drawing. And we're really going to spend some time working to differentiate our marks when it comes to our layouts, and we'll get into talking about isometrics and what kind of lines we want to exhibit in those drawings, okay? Because they take on very different meaning depending on how heavily you press your pencil in and how lightly you press your pencil in, okay? So putting down a sheet of paper on top of our boards gives us a couple of benefits, okay? So the first and primary benefit is having a sheet of paper taped down to then put another paper that will hold our drawing on top of it sort of gives us a cushion to work on top of, okay? So paper has different thicknesses, different softnesses. So when you go to push down that graphite on the surface of your paper, the paper behind it, this thicker, heavier sheet of paper, gives some allowance to how much you can push into it and how dark you can make that line, okay? If we were working just with our thinner sheet of drafting paper directly on the board, the board is really really solid, really hard, and when we go to draw on it, we can make different marks, but we can't necessarily get different thicknesses so easily, okay? So if you have like a really thin edge on your graphite, like in your mechanical pencil, and you're drawing a really heavy line, you might not be able to make it much thicker in order to get that line quality that you're really striving for, okay? So this just gives us a cushion to work on top of when we're actually working out a drawing, okay? Secondly, what's nice is because generally we're working with smaller sized paper, once we tape this paper down to the board, we've still got a little remaining space, which I find helpful when, we'll be working with a lot of fractions this semester. And, sometimes I just need a little scratch sheet to work out, like adding a couple fractions together and making sure that I've corrected myself in regards to the math on my drawing. So this just allows me that space to do that work and also to keep little notes in terms of like maybe I need to differentiate my line quality and make a little note here on the side that I can refer back to as I'm drawing. Okay, so I find this sheet of paper helpful for those reasons. I think you guys will too. Certainly the first being the line quality, but then the second being it's just nice to have that paper at hand. All right, so I'm going to use my T-square, okay, and I'm going to start by just lining it up with the bottom edge of my board, okay. When you're using a T-square, and I don't know how many of you have used a T-square in the past for really whatever reason. Maybe some of you have done some woodworking. I know maybe a few of you mentioned that the other day, or that might have been in my other class. I can't remember now. But when you're using a T-square on a drafting board, in this case, you want to make sure that the top part of the T-square is really lined up neatly with the edge of your board. I catch guys sometimes going a little off kilter, having a little gap between that T-square just because they put the T-square down, they think they locked it in, and in fact, it's just at a little bit of an angle, okay? So make sure that your T-square is lining up nice and neatly along the edge of your board. And then I'm gonna bump it down so that the bottom edge of it is in line with the bottom edge of my board. All right, scoot this back. Now I'm gonna take my larger sheet of paper. I'm just gonna bump it up against the top edge of my T-square here, okay? And I'm not gonna measure it to center it, but I am gonna eyeball it just to make sure that my paper isn't scooched too far to one side or the other. Just a little gauge of where that is all you need. All right. Now, once I've got my paper situated, you guys should each have a roll of tape. And I like to start by taping off the top edge, pull a nice long sheet or strip, rather, of masking tape, or some of you have painter's tape. Make sure it'll go all the way across the top. Okay, tear that off and then carefully tack that down and make sure it's nice and secure against your board. Okay, so Matt, can you see that? Can you guys see that a little bit better? All right. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to do that to this side, the bottom edge, and this side. As you're doing it, just make sure that your paper is laying flat against the board. You don't want any ruffles because then that will affect the paper that you put on top of it. Okay. So why don't you guys take a few minutes to do that? I'm going to take my T-square. Then you'll notice there are clear pieces of acetate on the top and the bottom. Double check yours because I found at least one from last semester that had one side but not the other. So if you're missing one side of that clear plastic, let me know and I'll get you a new one. Okay, but this just allows you to see through. It gives you a little window to see through to where you are marking along either edge, top or bottom. Okay, so I'm going to take the bottom edge of the wood part of my T-square. And you guys can see, if you kind of run your fingernail along the bottom of the paper where it's hidden by the tape, just kind of give that a little crease so that you can line this edge up with the bottom of the paper, not the bottom of the tape, just the bottom of the paper, okay? And I'm going to take my thin, this is tracing paper here, and I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to line that up, butt it up against the top edge, visually just kind of find where my center or close to my center is and place my tracing paper there. All right. Now, instead of using the masking tape to hold this down, we're going to use what are called these drafting dots. And these are just little stickers that are meant to hold the corners of your paper down to your board in order for it to stay in place, not move around as you're doing your work. Now, if you have a newer box, this will be a little bit easier. If you have an older box that's a little more beat up, you might just have to open it up and pull the stickers right off the tape. But the way this box works is you'll look at the top of it and there's a little image of a thumb there. If you put your thumb on top of that and kind of press down on that part of the box while pulling the tab from the opposite side, that should shoot out a dot for you, okay? You'll see one side's sticky, one side's not. Before you put this down on your paper, first, stick it on your clothing, okay? The goal of this is, yes, to hold our paper down to the board, but we don't want it to stick so much that when we're finished and we go to peel it off, that it tears the corner of our paper, okay? So just a little fuzz, a little lint from your clothing is a great way to keep this from being super sticky, okay? So you can just stick it on your shirt, your sweatshirt, your pants, peel it off, and then put it on the corner and just give it a light tap. You don't need to go over it and rub it super hard. Just a light tap will hold it in place, okay? And continue to do that until you've got 4 corners taken care of.
How much of the corner should be covered by this?
You know, I mean, my corner is like right here. So I usually do like a quarter of a slice of the dot. Okay. Just again, a light little tap is all you need for those corners. Like I said, if your box is giving you trouble, if it's not working, mine is a little stiff, so it's hard to pull those stickers out. If it's not working that way for you, no shame in just opening it up and peeling them right off the tape. Okay. Right, did that go okay for everyone? Everyone's at that point? Excellent, great, okay. All right, just a little bit about your board in addition to, what we've already talked about. If you look on the back side of your board, you don't have to flip yours over, but you can just kind of peek underneath it. You'll see on the top edge, you always want to make sure that the legs are away from you, okay, as well as the handle. So the handle is just for carrying. But you've got 2 legs that fold down and fold out, okay? So sometimes what I'll do, just because working with a large board like this and keeping it completely flat on the table, I've got to really hunch over to work and see what I'm doing. But sometimes it's much easier to put those legs up so that your board gets lifted up, angled towards you, and that allows you just to work a little bit easier and not strain your back so much. There will be instances in which it's actually easier to do a particular thing, a particular technique, if the board is laying down flat. But more times than not, I would suggest having it upright so that you're not putting a strain on your physical self. Okay. All right. That is a danger, though, of angling it up, is that your T-square tends to slide off. So just kind of, you can even, I've had guys in the past put like several drafting dots down here on their board, like down here on the tape, so that it kind of creates a little shelf for your T-square to sit up against. If that's something you want to do, that's perfectly fine. It's just a little trick. But yeah, just kind of make sure that your T-square doesn't fall repeatedly, because this can, over time, break apart. I can see on mine, it's sort of splitting up here where the screws are in place. It's still fine to use for now, but I know that'll cause problems as I continue to drop it and maybe abuse it. So just be aware of that. Okay. All right. Another thing that you guys should see on the Canvas page, and for those of you guys who are here, you have a physical copy of this in front of you, is a link to what's called our line quality sheet. Okay. So if you guys would pull that out, Matt, if you want to click on that on Canvas, there's just a little link. It's towards the bottom there.
Which one's the line quality sheet?
The line quality sheet is, yes, hold that one up for these guys to see. If you look up on the board too, you can see I have it up here. So that's what your line quality sheet should look like. Matt, did you find yours okay? Okay, all right. All right, so we're going to be using this as a reference. I gave you the physical copy because I think it's just nice to have at hand. You can, tape it to your board if you need it for reference, or you can use your pencil and kind of draw out the lines that we'll be using. We won't necessarily be addressing all of these different kinds of lines that are on this line quality sheet this semester, but I do want to talk to you today about 4 main line qualities that we are going to be using throughout the entire semester. And let me just stress this right now, and I'm gonna even switch my camera over so Matt can see my face when I say this. Because our semester is focused on manual drafting. Okay, so drafting with our hands, that's our primary concern this semester. Line quality and getting that line quality right from the very start is so important. You will struggle all semester if you don't put in the practice now. Okay, which is why we're going to start practicing today. We have plenty of time. I don't know why I thought we wouldn't have any time. There will be 4 main lines that we talk about today that will carry through to the end of the year. No questions about that. So really, really pay attention today to what I'm showing you and strive to get those lines right from the very beginning. Okay, even if you struggle a little bit today, practice is going to help you immensely. Okay, no one in here who plays a sport for the school gets away without practicing, right? Okay, so same thing. You're just training. You're training your body to be able to know how much pressure to put into your pencil as you're drawing these lines. You're training your body to know what the best way to move your arm is to carry those lines through in a complete drawing. All right, so it's very similar in that sense. All right, I will switch back my camera now. All right, and I'm just going to lay my board flat so that hopefully you guys can see a little bit better, and I might even try to zoom the camera in, this very fancy camera I got here. All right, I'm just going to work off to the side here. My tracing paper is here. I've got it held down with my dots, but I'm just going to use this little area in between my tracing paper and my tape on my larger sheet of paper to mark down the lines that we need to be aware of. Okay, so we're going to go in order from light to dark, and double check that you actually have lead in your pencil. If you don't have extra lead, I will get you some. Okay. So from light to dark, starting with our lightest line, which is our construction line. So construction lines, all right, so construction lines are just that. They are the lines that help us construct a drawing. So the very initial stages of a drawing, meaning that we're going to probably make some extraneous lines we don't necessarily need in the final draft. So these lines are always going to be our lightest, thinnest lines, barely visible, okay? So if I'm drawing a construction line here, you guys can see on the screen just the faintest hint of it, okay? It doesn't stand out. If I went in and needed to erase it, I could do so very easily and not see a hint of that line after doing so, okay? All right, another tool, just since I'm using it right now, and you guys have it in front of you, is your brush, okay? So this cleanliness is gonna be important when it comes to our drawings, and your brush, using that to brush away like little bits of graphite that might result from pressing your pencil down harder, or like those little eraser boogers that we all know and love, those can get brushed away with your brush as well. One thing that I ask you not to do with your brush is touch it touch the bristles a lot with your hands. I don't know. Some guys really like to like brush their face with it. I think they think like it feels nice. It's like, oh yeah, comforting. I don't know. I don't get it personally, but okay, whatever. It's like a a tactile thing. Um, avoid doing that just because your skin has oils in it that these bristles, which are made of horsehair, will start to absorb and pick up over time. So the more oil that gets absorbed into these bristles, the dirtier your brushing is going to be because that oil is going to get laid down on the paper and then the graphite won't erase easily. And it just becomes really, you get like a smudgy mess. Okay. So avoid touching the bristles too much except to the surface of your paper. Okay. Alrighty. So coming back, I'll redraw my construction line here. So again, very thin, very light pressure, just visible enough for me to see in order to go back over later with maybe a darker line where it's needed. Okay. So that's construction. The next line is going to be our center line. All right. Center lines are going to be critical for showing the center of an object. All right. So when we do a nice little drawing here, and it's either symmetrical or we're drawing a circle or an arc and we have to show the center of those spaces, we'll need center lines to indicate where that point is. All right, so if this is our thinnest, lightest line, this is going to be a step up. This is still going to be thin, but it is going to be dark. So we need to add a little more pressure in just to make that line slightly more visible to our eye when we first look at it. Okay. All right. So do you guys see the difference here between construction and center? Still a really pretty thin line. Yeah, sorry.
Should we be drawing these on our board as we go?
You can if you'd like. Yeah. You guys are gonna do an exercise with that on here. So if you want to just make a note of it on the side of your paper for now, then we'll actually start practicing on our tracing paper.
Okay.
So again, center lines indicate the center of symmetrical views of an object, or they'll indicate the center of a circle or an arc when we have that present on an object that we're drawing. Construction lines, and I don't know if I said this already, construction lines really never get left on a final drawing. They're just to build up the information for that drawing. So in most cases, you'll either go back over a construction line with a darker line, or you'll erase part of it entirely where it's not needed. The third line and the next step up from center line is going to be our visible line. All right. So our visible line is going to be dark, but we're going to add more pressure in so that it is even thicker than our center line. So visible lines are thick as well as dark. Okay. Who's that going?
That's pressure. They have academic lab now.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. It's very confusing. You have to get used to all of it. Yeah. Okay. So can you guys see the difference between the visible and the center line?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So that sometimes I even before I start drawing a visible line, I'll look at the end of my graphite here and turn it so that I'm not using the pointed end, from maybe the line I drew before it, but using more of the flat side of it. So just be aware of that if you're having trouble making a visible line, it might just be that you need to turn your pencil a little bit this way or that to get the flat side of that graphite put down to make that thicker line. So visible lines really are the outer contours of any object that we're drawing, okay? So center lines we find within our drawing and not as many of them, depending on what the object is. Visible lines will make up most of our drawing, okay? And then finally, we've got our border lines. And our border lines are gonna be our thickest, darkest lines. And sometimes in order to get a really nice border line, I do pass over it maybe twice, just to make sure that I've gotten that line a step up from my visible line. Border lines we won't use in every single drawing, but we certainly will use them in drawings where we create a margin around the exterior of our paper. Okay, so our border lines, again, they're going to be our thickest, darkest line. Okay, and that's, again, it's very similar to our visible lines, but sometimes you might just need to go over it one more time to give it a little bit darker, or at least a thicker quality than our visible line. All right, so construction center, visible, and border. So on your paper, what I'm gonna ask you guys to do is I'm gonna ask you to divide your tracing paper into quadrants. So finding the center of the paper first, and then drawing a horizontal and vertical line to split it into 4 equal quadrants. And then in 2 of the quadrants, I'm gonna have you guys practice, and I'll show you this here in a minute. I'm gonna have you practice using your T-square and your triangles to make these 4 different lines repeatedly. Okay, so again, I said we're going to work on repetition. We're going to work on some practice here so that you guys can feel comfortable with these lines. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so that maybe this is makes a little more sense. Okay. Is that good? You guys can see the whole paper now?
Yeah.
Okay. Matt, are you doing okay? Okay, great. Okay, what might be the easiest or fastest way to find the center of this paper? Yeah.
Get the dimensions of the paper.
I could get the dimensions, right? And then I can just do the math, split it in half one way and split it in half the other way. What if I didn't have a ruler?
You fold it.
I could fold it, but I've already taped it down to my board.
Eyeball.
We're going to try to avoid eyeballing in here if at all possible. I know I just told you to eyeball it in terms of, centering it on your board.
Roll it across, right?
Yes, find the center by cutting across corner to corner, okay? So I'm going to use my T-square. Make sure you line it up with the diagonal corners. And I'm going to take my pencil, and I know generally that the center is going to fall somewhere in here, right? So instead of drawing a line all the way across from corner to corner, because then I'm going to have to go back and erase a lot of it, I'm just going to draw a little bit of that line right here. Now, if I'm going to have to erase some of this line later, what line quality should I be drawing it in? Construction, right, okay. So I've got a little line right there, and then I'll do the same thing going from this corner to this corner. And then really it's just making a mark right there where it intersects that previous line. So that's the fastest, easiest way, in my opinion, to find the center of your paper. From that point, yeah.
What eraser do we use?
So great question. Okay, the question was, what eraser do we use? You guys should all have a little eraser on the end of your pencil. Ideally, you've got a little cap that goes over it so that when you push it down to expel the lead from the other side, it doesn't shove the eraser down in there. Is anyone finding that they don't have an eraser on that end?
Mine's looking oh, I see. Yeah.
Okay, so if you pull your eraser out, a lot of them will have additional eraser. You just kind of need to scooch it up in that metal clamp and then kind of tighten that clamp around it and then put it back down in your pencil. If you don't have much extra when you pull that eraser out, you should have extra erasers in your bag, but let me know if that is not the case.
What about this white guy?
That is for maybe erasing larger areas if you need it. So whatever you find it useful for. Yeah, so you guys should have a larger white eraser as well. All right, now, once you guys have found the center, like I said, we're going to divide this into quadrants. Now, let me tell you about these triangles. These triangles you guys will use pretty much every day. They're going to be a very common tool for us, as well as your T-square. When you are drawing vertical and horizontal lines, in order to keep from having to constantly rotate and orient your T-square over and over between the vertical and the horizontal, it's best to just keep your T-square for the horizontal marks and then use your triangle in conjunction with your T-square to make the vertical lines, all right? And you have a 90-degree angle on both triangles here. So both your 30, 60, 90, as well as your 45-degree triangle. So either one is fine. I believe you all have big enough triangles that will go all the way from top to bottom of your paper as well. So I'm going to use my T-square to draw my line, my horizontal line going across. And again, and so this should be your border line quality. So I'll make one heavy pass across, keeping my T-square in place, go back over it. Then meeting at the same point, using my T-square, make sure again it's right, pushed up right against your the edge of your board. And then using my triangle to meet it down here, I'm going to find my point and draw my vertical line. And since this is going to be a practice sheet of paper, what I would also suggest doing at this time is take the opportunity, now that you have your paper tacked down, you have it situated in the right position, you know it's level. What I like to do is I'll just take my pencil and go along the bottom edge of my paper here and just draw a light little line along the bottom as well as coming up the sides so that every time I go to lay my paper down, I already know generally where that paper is going to sit. Okay, you still want to use your T-square to make sure it is nice and straight. Um, but I feel like that helps me just get an idea already of where that paper is going to be situated. Okay, you can do it if you want. You don't have to. It's personal preference. Makes my life a little bit easier, but it's really truly up to you. Okay. All right, so these top two quadrants here, I want you guys to practice one quadrant with horizontal lines and one quadrant with vertical lines. So you're going to use your T-square. Starting at the top of this quadrant, you're going to go through each of the 4 line qualities, starting with construction, then to center, then visible, then border. And you're going to fill up this quadrant all the way from side to side with those 4 line qualities. Repeat it over and over until you get all the way to the bottom. You're going to do the same thing in this quadrant, except with vertical lines. So starting on one side, construction, center, visible, border. Construction, center, visible, border, until you've filled up all the way across. Keep those lines tightly packed together so that you have lots of room for lots of practice, okay? So just a little dip down for each different line quality. Okay. The goal really is to achieve that line quality, but also to keep it consistent from one side to the other all the way through. The problem I see a lot of guys running into is not so much getting the right pressure, but maintaining that pressure. Okay, so you might start off really well and then trail off, or you might start off with the right pressure and then get a lot heavier as you're pulling your pencil across. Keep in mind that it's a lot easier to move your whole arm. So move from the elbow, okay, move your whole, or actually move from the shoulder, okay, and bring your whole arm across as opposed to moving from the elbow like this, and especially not moving just from the wrist, okay. This is really limiting when you're just using your wrist to move your pencil. The elbow is better and can be used in some situations, but when you're drawing longer lines and trying to maintain that consistency, using your whole arm and moving from your shoulder tends to be the best way to do that.